Right, evening everyone. I think if it's all right with everyone, we will kick off. I imagine we'll have people joining us over the next 15-20 minutes or so, but we may as well get started. The nice thing about doing it over Zoom is that people don't walk in late and disrupt everything, so that's good. My name's Dan. I'm going to be kicking off this evening. I think I know many of you. I can see some people on the cameras there that I know. Inevitably, some people are saying some rude stuff. I can already see that. Dave, I'm looking at you in particular in that instance. It's really nice to have so much interest on this subject tonight and to have it so varied. There's a lot of people who know the practice, but equally there's a lot of people tonight who are unaware of LLM and we don't have any contact with yet. So it's really good to have such varied interest. Inevitably, we're going to be slightly affected by the internet, I would imagine, at various times, but we'll give it our best shot. So this is a general plan for the evening. I'll be kicking off with a bit of an introduction, what we hope to get out of the evening, and maybe our longer term plans. And then we'll have a contribution from Claire on some of these subsections, and then Rob as well. And at the end, we're hoping to get some feedback and ask you guys some questions. And to wrap up by 9 at the latest, we're sure you've all got plenty of other things to do. Now, Zoom's been brilliant in that it introduces lots more people to this type of discussion, but there'll be some things that we can't do as well. So I think discussion with such a large number of people is going to be limited in this particular meeting, but hopefully we can expand on that. And there may be this delay, particularly when moving on slides for some of the speakers later on. Now, what we find works really well with this is to have your cameras on because it's a good bit of interaction. We can check nobody's falling asleep, but I've muted you all and we will make use of the chat function. So the idea is that we can keep some questions going through the chat function as we go through the evening. We'll keep a lookout for those and then try and get to as many as we can at the end. But as I say, with a big number of people, that could be slightly challenging. You'll notice in this breakdown of the evening, a lot of those points are questions, and that's because really we want to get your opinions on things. We don't propose to be experts on any of these things, but we want to get feedback really. So the subject of regenerative agriculture is a real hot topic at the minute. Claire's going to touch a bit more on that, but it's increasingly talked about and there's more and more awareness. And we know that what comes along with that is more discussion groups and forums that already exist. And we don't pretend to be experts in this area, or we would never claim to be experts in any area really. But we do feel that there's scope for a vet-led discussion group on this subject. And it's that we want to put to you this evening, to suggest some proposals and join up a load of interested, like-minded individuals and see if further work and discussion in this area has any legs. We think a vet angle is important, not just from the perspective of animal health, but we think it's important to link up all these areas. But we see our real role as being facilitators to help collaborative learning amongst like-minded individuals. And we've got some well-established discussion groups in the practice. So we know that this format works, although there's some new challenges with respect to the current situation and doing things distantly. But we also know that what people get out of these discussion groups is not so much what the person in front of them is telling them, but it's what they learn off each other. And so clearly discussion is really, really important to getting these groups working as well as they can. So we thought it was a good idea to begin with who are we. Some of you know LLM, many of you don't. So we've got Dan and Rob and Claire this evening, all vets and all with an interest in regenerative agriculture. But we have our own specific areas of interest, including nutrition, soil health, diversification, biodiversity, conservation medicine. We work in beef, sheep and dairy. And between the three of us, we worked out we have over 36 years of combined experience in farm practice. I'm sure you're thinking that neither Rob or Claire look old enough to have that experience and that I've probably all got it myself, but I had a very difficult paper round, so it isn't entirely symptomatic of how old I am. We're part of a farm practice that employs over 30 vets and 10 vet techs over 3 main sites. We serve farms in Staffordshire, Lancashire, North Wales, Cheshire and Derbyshire, and we're already doing certain things in this area. So now we've introduced ourselves, it would be really good to start with a very quick poll and to get an idea of who you all are. So I'm just going to launch a poll. I've just noticed I've got to very quickly nip over to the other computer and log out of there. Sorry guys, the first technological challenge of the evening. So what we're likely to have to do is follow this up with a bit of a poll in a moment to get an idea of who we're dealing with. But what I'm going to do is continue on with where we're looking here. So in terms of the objectives of tonight's meetings, we hope to convey our enthusiasm for the subject and join up with like-minded people. We hope to demonstrate the role of the vet within regenerative agriculture and collaborative learning. And we hope to see if you share our keenness for a discussion group on the subject, one that is vet-led and allows farmers to learn from each other. And we're going to explore some possible subject areas with you guys and look at some examples of what is already being done. Now, of course, there's some limitations of this meeting. We're not going to explore any one individual subject in any great depth. Again, we don't pretend to be experts in the area. We think there's levels of expertise exist where people are doing these things already. We are not going to probably be able to get as much discussion as we'd like on these different subject areas through the Zoom format. But at the end of tonight, we would hope to be able to gather some feedback from you guys in terms of whether you think this has legs and what you would like to see next. So the first plan is to hand over to Claire and see if we can learn a bit from her about regenerative agriculture as an overall concept.
Dan, did you mention about the chat function if people want to ask questions? I don't think I can hear you.
Yeah, so we talked about the chat function and recording some questions on there and checking those out as we go.
Hi everyone, I'm Claire, I'm one of the vets here, and I have recently completed a postgraduate certificate in conservation medicine, which was Dan talking about. Which will be down the route of looking a bit more into regenerative agriculture and some of the principles surrounding it. So I want to first just say forgive me for those of you who know a lot about this already. I'm very aware that we've got some people listening who are already doing amazing stuff on their farms, but we also have people here who haven't done a lot or just wanting to understand a bit more about what it means. So I just agriculture, as Dan said, we're not experts and there's a lot of information out there, but this is kind of my take on it. So I think I've wanted to start by saying you're all aware, as am I, that farming hasn't really received the best press in recent years, which is probably a massive understatement. There's been increasing pressure from environmentalists on the back of some fairly robust research that farming or agriculture as a whole, whichever way you look at it, contributes fairly significantly to carbon emissions across the globe. There's also an ever-increasing interest from consumers on how their food's produced, and without dwelling on it too much or generating a lot of negativity around it, we've had a massive vegan movement which has caused into question some of the common practices on our farms. So some people might roll their eyes at this, but ultimately these guys are your customers, and consumer perspective is hugely important now more than ever to our businesses. And the supermarkets know this. That's why they now demand certain welfare performance parameters from their suppliers. And I think there's also an expectation from the public that farmers and landowners are aware of and have a positive impact on the environment around them. So off the back of this, I think regenerative agriculture has a massive buzz around it at the moment, like Dan was saying, and I see it as a really positive response to a lot of the negativity. So if you can flick forward for me, Dan. Regenerative agriculture is based on a system of farming principles that basically increases biodiversity, it improves soils, watersheds, and enhances certain ecosystem services. And the aim of it is to capture carbon both in soil and in plant biomass off the ground, not just to stabilise, but actually potentially reverse atmospheric accumulation of carbon. And a lot of recent data from the Environment Agency suggests that farms currently manage about 70% of land in the UK, and UK soil contains about 10 billion tonnes of carbon, which is equal to about 80 years of annual greenhouse gas emissions. That is a lot of carbon, and our aim really is to keep that in there. Intensive agricultural practices, they reckon, have caused a loss of around 40 to 60% of organic carbon to the atmosphere. Now, we know we don't have a carbon problem. The level of carbon in the world is a constant, but it's just seemingly in the wrong place. It's getting into the air and into the atmosphere where it's causing problems rather than staying under the ground. And regenerative agriculture wants to change that and combat it. So by doing that, it pulls together different schools of thought. So things from like organic farming, holistic management practices, agroforestry, agroecology being another one, business, and interestingly, social sciences as well. It's very much, I would say, about changing perspectives and starting to see farms as entire ecosystems from the ground up. So from the soil to literally the people that work on your farms. Now, the science behind these principles hasn't always been easy to come by. It's been a lot of word of mouth and people saying they see good things out of doing certain practices. But there is mounting evidence, and not least recently by Rothamsted Research in Hertfordshire, which has looked at soil data from the past 50 years. And it has concluded that conventional agricultural practices are detrimental to soil health. So I'm going to talk now a little bit more broadly about some of the principles of regenerative agriculture in terms of soil health, but potentially how it also might relate to your businesses as well. Dan, can you forward me again, please? We did try and do this separately before, guys, but it didn't work very well, so Dan keeps getting prompts. So the first thing I wanted to touch on was diversity. So there is resilience in diversity. And we hear a lot now about diversification in farming enterprise, and some of you will have made changes to your business models or are thinking about doing so. But as an example, dairies that are reliant on milk price, by having another income stream there, there's a potential to mitigate some of that risk. And there's talk about stacking businesses, and I'm sure a lot of you will have read Gabe Brown. He talks about he has a beef enterprise, he has sheep, he has pork, eggs and crops in his system as well. Also, diversity of people in your business or people contributing to it. So some of the best outcomes on farm for me come from roundtable discussions with every advisor involved in your business. So these very open, honest and often frank discussions between farmers, between vets, nutritionists, advisors, your farm manager, maybe even your like part-time relief milkers, they can be drivers for really positive change in your business. And often things come out of those meetings that you don't necessarily want to hear, but you probably do need to hear. And in terms of soil health, I think biodiversity is a big one. Also, diversity of people in your farm for me come from roundtable on mimicking nature and working. Often things come out of those meetings that you don't. And we know now that diversity of plant species leads to increases in insect and pollinator diversity. And you only need to look at it in countryside stewardship schemes to get a feel for this. Different plants do different jobs. They have different root depths within the soil. That may be a plough or other tools that are needed to do more conventional systems. Trees are being used more widely. So benefits are reported in livestock with regards to mineral and trace element availability in trees, as well as flood protection and many other benefits too. And now there's lots of funding available for tree planting on farms in association with the Woodland Trust. And I'd urge you, if you're interested, to think if it might work in your system, to have a bit of a look at that. There's lots of funding around that. The other thing with biodiversity is we know that monocultures in anything can be detrimental. If you grow one thing in a field repeatedly, you leave open to risk of disease, to risk of pests. and you require more inputs to deal with these, the problem returns, you use more and more inputs to control the problem, and so on and so forth. And there was a paper which was produced back in 2009, which is actually quite a long time ago now, but that looked at the impact of biodiversity on the emergence and transmission of infectious diseases. So not just in plants, but in animals and humans as well. And it did conclude that preserving intact ecosystems and their biodiversity should generally reduce the prevalence of infectious disease, which is a really interesting point. So even if we grow a field of ryegrass as an example, which we know cows will produce a lot of milk from, there is a lack of biodiversity in that field, which may have impact on soil health and potentially on animal health that we don't know enough about. Ryegrass has got one root depth, so in terms of soil health, you'll have limited beneficial organisms within that soil. And I did have a chat with a farmer recently about his fields, and he was telling me the only field he's never actually had to use any more inputs on is a diverse lane that he planted, I think it was over a decade ago now. The cows reportedly produce less milk from that field, but then you get into whole different topics about different types of animals and different systems, which is probably a whole subject in its field. Dan, can you flip me forward again, please? I think this is taking a little bit longer to go through. Another thing I wanted to discuss was protection. So in terms of soil surface, that means that I think this is still surface cover, basically. So when the soil is there, we know that we get weeds growing, and that is, in a way, it's nature's way of saying that. In a way, it's nature's way of saying that the ground wants cover. And by keeping soil covered, we reduce erosion, we reduce runoff of topsoil, nutrient leaching, which affects our river systems. And by keeping the soil covered, you get a more regular temperature. So therefore, you reduce evaporation of water, and you potentially improve the microbial health of that soil, which is also mentioned in the Robinson report. And again, another piece that's definitely worth a read if you get the time. Cover crops have become very popular, with more farms adopting this principle, and the use of things like catch crops, nitrogen fixing legumes. I can't even say that sentence. The list goes on really, and it's probably a meeting or two in its own right. It's also probably important, separately, so along the line, that's definitely worth a read if you get the kinds of protection that we touch on, personal protection and your own ability to withstand crises. So I don't know how often you think about yourself when you're farming and really ask yourself how you're doing. Are you happy? That's definitely worth a read if you get the time. With more fire when you don't have that time to switch off, do you think that might have an effect on your business? I know what you're all like, because I've been with you when you're all still talking about cows after work. Also probably important, your own ability to withstand crises. So I'm going to really ask yourself, because I probably read every night myself, but I do have to give myself my own time, and whether that's going for a walk or taking holidays or spending time with your family, those things are important, and they get forgotten about sometimes. And I think I just need to remember, and I'm sure you probably think it as well sometimes, that you need to remember that you should be working to live and not really living to work. But I know it's harder than it seems. Cover crops have become very popular, with more farms adopting this principle. I can't even say that sentence is about reducing inputs. So again, if we start with the soil perspective on reducing inputs, it means that there's a greater mass of plants and other life within the it's also probably important, soil. So thinking about things like pesticides and herbicides, if we apply a pesticide to a crop, does it just kill the pest you're trying to control, or does it kill all the good ones too? Do you get build up a resistance to these pesticides in your soils and potentially herbicides? And I know what you're all like, because I've been in the use as well. And I want to say that I'm not saying you shouldn't use them, but I wonder if we should be thinking a bit more about how we use them. But I do have to give myself my own time, and if that use is appropriate, if we start to think holistically about our businesses. So you know, that things like synthetic nitrogen or ammonia-based fertilizers don't contain carbon, unlike manure, and therefore you get increased nitrogen levels of soil, which will increase your yield with short-term gain. And in health, is about reducing inputs. So about reducing inputs, you use carbon. So it's excreted as a polymer, or basically like a glue, which allows air, water and nutrients to circulate, and it makes soil more porous and able to hold on to that water and the carbon and nutrients that we want to keep in there. We apply pesticides to a crop. And for me, reducing inputs from a vet perspective has been an important one, and I've probably started thinking about it a lot more this year. So it's excreted as allows air, water and nutrients to circulate. It's actually a really, really great story, I'd say, for the UK livestock industry. So obviously, and for me, reducing inputs from vets is an important one, and I probably started thinking of turn towards preventative management and control of disease. And there was actually figures from the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, or the VMD in the UK, which suggested that antibiotic use between 2014 and 2018 actually fell by over 50%, which is phenomenal, really, if you think about it, in only 4 years. And that's a massive testament. So the next one, again, if we go start with the soil, and when we blanketly apply a pet to treat animals with antibiotics, it's a sign that something's fundamentally, and I want to say that we should be thinking a bit more about how we have our businesses, so on animals, and it's often far from the natural state, and sometimes we do suffer the consequences of that. And I guess the other thing this year, integrated parasite control on the farm. This is your 5-minute warning, by the way, that I'm about to start talking about dung beetles. Dan, can you flick forward again for me? I know that using worming products on your cows, so if you use it, they go out to grass, you give them wormer at 3 weeks, you give it at 8 weeks, you give it 13 weeks after turnout. You might, I guess, as an example, but is it actually the best thing for your cows? I know they go out to grass, you give them worm and an outbreak of lungworm as an example, because contact with lungworm in order to develop immunity. But if you worm them so hard in their first year that they never get the opportunity to build that immunity, what happens the next year at turnout? What's that?
Just turn the video off. It'll save
Oh, okay.
your video. Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I forgot where I was up to now. Yeah, so lungworms, if we end up worming cows really hard that they never get the opportunity to build any immunity, what happens the next year at turnout? And again, there's been increasing resistance to wormers. So it's been really well documented in sheep that there's been resistance for years. But there are now more and more reports of wormer resistance in cattle, and we probably should be trying to protect them for when we really need them. Now, ivermectins, they're cheap, and I get that, but they're also massively detrimental to dung beetle populations. And you may say, why should you care about dung beetles? But dung beetles are ace. They control nuisance fly populations, so they carry around on their backs these little phoretic mites, and they literally eat fly eggs. They themselves eat the liquid portion of cow muck or sheep muck as well. They dry it out, and then they make it unsuitable for nuisance fly to lay their eggs in it. They also pull organic matter down into the soil. So that lovely muck that you get on the surface of the ground that's full of carbon, we want that under the ground, and some dung beetles provide that service for free. They are like living, breathing pasture hoovers, and we kill them off with ivermectins. And I think we've lost about 50% of UK dung beetle species in 50 years, probably through ivermectin use and increased housing of animals. So in order to mitigate this, I've started doing more fecal egg counts for some clients. I've got 3 farms currently on trial, and only 1 so far has used any wormer this year. And that was off the back of appropriate diagnosis of lungworm. We use a very narrow spectrum wormer that isn't as lethal to other organisms, but still does a great job. And we've saved probably a fair amount of dung beetles along the way, and also the pocket, because we haven't wormed those animals as much as we've only wormed them when they needed it, not just as and when because we thought we should do it. There's a lot more to say about dung beetles, but I reckon we could save that for a whole dung beetle meeting. Dan, can you flick me forward again, please? So integrating livestock is the next one, and integrating it into any farming system appears to have beneficial effects. Again, some of the research from Rothamsted looking at how organic material like manure can improve drought and flood resistance is a really good read. And I briefly touched on the benefits of manure in soil earlier, but there's much more to discuss in the future, I guess. Also animal impact on carbon sequestration. So there's people using mob grazing systems where you basically use very high densities of cattle for short periods of time on pasture. And the thinking behind this is that you get beneficial effects of cows or sheep and even pigs eating, trampling, fertilizing, and leaving a bit of organic matter behind. And we almost act as their predator by moving them around the way we do. It's a big area, and it's definitely one to break down in more detail. The sort of animals that you use in these systems to get maximum benefit is really important. And we already know this from the different types of cows that we have in extensive versus intensive systems, and highland versus lowland sheep will be another example. But again, another subject area to go forward. And Dan, can you flick forward for me? So this one is the one that I'm probably not going to say a lot about because it's really not my area. But it's about reducing soil disturbance and minimising tillage. Now, from the picture, I don't know if you can see, yeah, it's not coming up. I mean, I know that's a plough in the picture, but that's probably about it. And you guys will know a lot more about it than I do. And again, it's another great reason for getting you all together in a room to discuss this stuff. There is increasing evidence that ploughing leads to oxidation, and then you get carbon and water loss from the soils. So obviously we don't want that. So ultimately, I think that's probably about it for me. That's a bit of a nutshell and a very, very small view of a lot of things that are going on out there. But now I'm probably going to hand over to Rob, and he's going to talk to you a bit about some of the services that we're offering at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you, Claire. Great summary there of what's a really big and interesting topic. So I'm sure it'll generate lots of good discussion. Apologies for the internet problems. We predicted we might have some, but hopefully we'll go forward a bit better with the sound now. So yeah, I'm going to pick up on some of the threads that Claire's covered and outline areas that we're already active in as vets, and we feel that we can contribute in some way on farm. Dan, you all right to click forward to the next slide? Brilliant. So what are we doing? And as Claire said, we've been engaging as many farms as possible. So Claire works down in Whitchurch and I'm up in Lancashire with another team, but we're working across the practice to bring on board as many farms into integrated parasite control planning as possible, for all the reasons Claire said. And it's an area that often vets have been cut out of historically, yet we feel a huge responsibility really to get back involved in that and make a positive sort of impact. So like Claire said, there's a few farms down here, and we've got the whole team up in Lancashire working on this. So we've got 20 farms in a pilot roughly across the bases, saving money through diagnostic-led treatment rather than just treating. And the impact on resistance that will have on minimizing the development of resistance is enormous. And again, share Claire's enthusiasm for the dung beetle, and just watching farming families sticking their noses into dung and getting enthusiastic has been brilliant. And the benefits that they bring to the farms too. And then this has led pretty neatly into wanting to do more by way of soil health, and not just sort of what we tend to think of soil health as maybe chemical, but also structure and biology. And I guess the dung beetle is included in that, and earthworms. And we've been trialing or using an app called Soil Mentor, which we can get you a free trial of, and it really helps to both teach you as a farmer or a vet tech, anyone, about some of the tests and why they're important, but also then to record it and monitor it field by field over time and all sorts of different tests. So I really encourage anyone who's interested to contact us or Soil Mentor directly, and we'll get you a trial. And then between the two of those two things, sort of it flows into biodiversity. So on the screen here, hopefully you can see a little simple biodiversity report looking at dung beetles, and the impact of that is probably two main ways that's been used. One is just sticking it up in on farms, especially where people are selling products on farm. So engaging the public and driving conversation and interest, and it can really help sales on farm and really open people's minds, which I think is really important if we want the public to pay, proper prices for quality food. But also it fits in really neatly with the way that the supply chain is going and consumer preferences, with the likes of the aligned contracts and Red Tractor demanding biodiversity reports and action plans, and all sorts of environmental requirements. Yeah, and then as Claire's gone through, there's all sorts of other areas. The conversation then naturally leads into any areas we can help with, and I think we've been able to just connect farms with other people who are experts in this area, other farmers, which has been really, really interesting. And, you know, combining management opportunities with wormers or treatments, for example, is a brilliant tool in our box. And then finally, looking at funding available out there, and Claire's already mentioned the Woodland Trust, there's also the Rivers Trust, and they provide awesome support for farms. I've taken a few around recently, and there's been some really exciting sort of opportunities that people are going to follow up on. But then there's also opportunities out there that I think are far less sort of commonly thought about, and I think it'll be the way it goes, which is private funding. So, for example, biodiversity credits with the likes of big business. You know, I made one up. Perhaps EasyJet might want to reduce their carbon footprint, and so they could potentially pay for credits, and that is something that's already happening. I think National Grid have been involved in some, and Network Rail. So we're keen to sort of create contacts and try and connect people up. If that's something you're interested in, then do talk to us. And then some of you may not have used or heard of the Woodland Carbon Code, which was introduced this year, and it's a government-backed scheme that gives a base price for the carbon sequestered by planting trees. So we've got a couple of people looking at that, and one's done that at least. And then down the next slide, the final one on the list, obviously, is subsidy. Has that come through yet? So it's been hotly talked about, the ELM scheme, environmental land management, with its sort of catchy phrase, public money for public goods. So unfortunately, there'll be some more hoops to jump through to gain subsidy in the future, but it does present some interesting opportunities. Now at this point I was going to do a poll, but that functionality is not here. So I might just see if people fancy it, we can review later through the chat, just to get a handle on how much is known about ELMS, how much people are thinking about it. If you just want to maybe give a score, 1 for nothing, 2 for a bit, and 3 for you really feel confident what's happening. If you want to, just chuck that into the chat, and we can look at that later. And I guess for some people it might be for some people it might be an area of concern. So Dan, if we flick to the next slide. So this is a slide that summarizes why it might be concerned for some people. It's basically a proxy for profit from farm businesses in different areas, and what percentage of that profit is made up by the subsidy. So as you can see, there's a big variation. We've got poultry on the one hand, it makes up very little of that profit, and dairy on the other, maybe 40% towards. But really, it's the grazing systems that it's extremely important for. So yeah, I mean, I'm just having a look at the chat now. We've got 19 responses. So let's have a quick flick. So quite a bit, yeah, a variation here. Some not knowing much, and others really feeling confident. So we will just try and do a very brief summary of what's involved. So it's obviously a replacement for CAP for English farmers. And CAP subsidy was valued at 2.5 billion, roughly speaking, and 86% of that was in the form of basic payments, with 14% in countryside stewardship. And the countryside stewardship has delivered some good value for money in terms of environment, but it has been a very bureaucratic and is considered to be insufficient for the 25-year environment plan goals. So what are these public goods or public services? There's at the moment 6 that have been formally talked about: air, water, mitigating in environmental hazards, mitigation and adaptation to climate change, plants, wildlife and biodiversity, and then beauty and heritage. And broadly speaking, it's divided now, they've decided into 3 tiers. Tier 1 will largely be action-based, we think. So that's almost very similar to what's already in place, but they will be actions that are going to be trying to be environmental in their outcomes. And they are aiming for a very high uptake of that. Then tier 2 starts to get a bit more interesting, and they want to see farmers linking up and applying together to, for example, put in a bid around a local area and drive something across a local environment. That might be a river catchment system. And then tier 3 would be far more bespoke and would probably be much more landscape level. And I'm not sure how many of those there will be in the end, and there will be bespoke agreements. So the basic payments are going to start to be reduced pretty soon. And there's a table up that I know you've been looking at for a while now, apologies, because it's bad news. But that will progressively increase over the next few years. And I think the most important thing is to start to plan. And I hear some people are planning already and others haven't heard of it as I go around. Dan, if you could flick to the next slide, please. So that's a bit more of a graphic way of explaining it. The big blue area is the basic payment reductions between now and 2028. And they'll really sort of transition harder once ELMS is introduced in 2024. And the orange represents countryside stewardship, and then countryside stewardship plus ELMS payments. Okay, Dan, next slide, please. And in terms of a sort of a visual for how that's all going, we're currently in a consultation process, and it's another key message I wanted to get across. It's going to affect everyone, not just farmers, but obviously as farmers, it's going to affect you guys the most. So I'd encourage everyone to input into it. I think the deadline for submission is the end of this month, the 31st. So we're in the design stage at the minute. And then next one down, there's plenty of tests and trials going on, and they're going to be going on now and all the way through to 2028. And then at some point next year, the ELMS national pilot will begin. And then eventually in 2024, the scheme itself will start, with basic payments phased out over that period and countryside stewardship continuing. I guess the other thing to say is all of this is very much up in the air. They're designing it. So again, get involved and tell the government what you think. Okay, Dan, next slide, please. So this slide sort of tries to sort of show the difference between what we're currently been used to, action-based scheme, paying for prescribed management actions, versus what they would like to move towards, but this is probably going to only apply to tier 2 and 3, which is results-based scheme. I think that's a really interesting approach. I'm not sure how they'll measure it. I'm not sure they do yet, but again, that's part of the consultation, so feel free to get involved. Dan, next slide, please. Yeah, so a little whistle-stop tour through ELMS, and I wanted to just finish by thanking the Dung Beetle on behalf of everyone. And if there was some research that was done in 2015, shows that their activity for free gives us a benefit of 367 million a year, just to the cattle industry in the UK. So appreciate them. Right, thanks everyone, and I'll hand you over back to Dan.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Claire. Now, apologies to everyone that having asked you all to keep your cameras on, all 3 of our cameras suddenly disappeared off. We realised that everyone was suddenly doing their online grocery ordering at exactly this time. So it sucked out all our internet, and we found that the sound quality improved a lot when we all disappeared. So hopefully you guys noticed that as well. One thing we wanted to ask you all was topics you might be interested in. And so the chat function has worked quite nicely there once some questions started coming up. And so it'd be good to ask you some topics. Now, we thought of topics that people may be interested in. So we touched a bit on soil health, which I think we'd all agree is the basis of everything. Looking at soil structure on farm potentially. Getting more from your pasture. So Claire touched on some of the limitations of ryegrass monoculture, for example. Minerals and how we can encourage mineral growth into our pasture and then into our animals or into our arable crops, if that's the route we're going down to. Integrating livestock, Claire talked about that. Dung beetles, you can see we've got two people who are incredibly keen on dung beetles, so a bit more work and discussion on those. Integrated parasite control, maybe the use of farming in forestry as well, utilising slurry and manure better. So it'd be interesting to hear from you guys, potentially on the chat function now, or if you've got anything to say. We've got a bit of time for discussion, so feel free to unmute yourself and contribute through that avenue. The other option is that we are also able to get some feedback, and I'll put some contact details up in a minute, to contact us through email, or many of you will have our phone numbers or the phone number of the practice, so you can come through that way. But has anybody got any subjects they would like to put up that we could maybe discuss in future, or anything that they would like to say following the points from Rob and Claire earlier? It doesn't look like we have any sort of any desire for verbal communication by the looks of it. We've got some stuff coming through there from Michael. Thank you, Michael. Yeah.
Hold on a second, Dan. I want to speak as usual.
Please do.
I was just interested because I haven't really talked to Rob that much about it. What do you actually do on farm, Rob, in terms of your biodiversity assessments? Like, I know you mentioned a bit about it, but I'm not actually clear what you've done on farm with the 20 farms and the pilots, and what kind of things you're looking at and what kind of feedback you're giving to the farmers.
Yeah, so those pilots were about integrated parasite control planning. So I probably could share a screen and show you roughly one of an example, maybe. But really, what we started with was looking at what they had been doing for the last few years, and then working together to understand where the pitfalls might be. So commonly, that might be a series of applications of a pour on ivermectin, which was potentially a waste of money, certainly causing harm to beneficials like dung beetles and losing the valuable benefits that they could bring to soil health and parasites. But then also, sometimes they might have been doing the same thing year on year for a number of years, treating everything. So the risk of resistance was enormous. And so far, as Claire said, we've managed to monitor very regularly the different groups, understand the whole system, monitor more closely or less closely depending on the risk, maybe incorporate some different management strategies, and then treat only when necessary. And there's been very few treatments. The other sort of key thing here is actually lungworm is the big risk right now. And so getting people, the ones we started early enough, to consider vaccination if it's appropriate in their system, is a really good safety net. So I don't know if that answers maybe the first part of the main points of the parasite control planning. But then whilst we're picking up muck samples, talking to clients about it, we're also then engaging in terms of the dung beetles and collecting, between us, gathering information to see what numbers of species they have. That's sort of the diversity of species on farm, which is really important because each dung beetle species does slightly different things. Some live in the pat and just eat away at the muck. Others tunnel down deep and others tunnel in different directions. So it's important to have diversity. And then obviously abundance, how many. And it's incredible to see the variation on farms depending on all sorts of things, including environmental factors, but also what we've done on farm. So the outputs, I think there was a screen grab of one of the reports. I've also done a couple of bird biodiversity surveys using a song meter, and then using a bit of software to identify different species, and then graphically representing it again, just for engagement and purposes really. And it ticks a few boxes for some of the aligned contracts. Does that answer your comment, Andrew?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was great.
How long have you been running your trial?
How long? The pilot?
Yeah, because this year, I know every year it seems like it's a unique year, but this year's been a very unique year. We've had a very, very dry May, then a very wet June.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started it at the start of the year, and you're right, the weather seems to be crazy every year now. But yeah, so initially at the start of the season, I was worried about lungworm from last year because we saw quite a lot of it. But then with the dry spell, that's really, really good conditions to kill off a lot of the worms on the pasture. But now it's become very warm and very damp, so it's perfect conditions for gutworm and lungworm. So that's the point of integrated parasite control planning. It's really about being fully engaged, and it's much more complex than just using a poron. So it's a challenge.
Rob, what do you, if obviously you've done this pilot on 20 farms and you're looking at an integrated parasite control approach, if we're looking at those farms and actually there's been a dogmatic approach to treatment historically with very little justification for treatment, why do you think that is the case, and what do you think are the barriers to actually responsibly using wormers on farm, especially in the cattle industry? Why hasn't the cattle industry, why don't we as an industry, and that probably includes the sheep industry, because actually we know the sheep industry has a big issue, but they still don't engage in appropriate parasite control management. I am making sweeping generalizations here, but that's my impression. So why is there this dogmatic approach to worming where we just worm because that's what we've done? What
Yeah, well, there's a number of things I think going on. One is vets have not been involved enough. I think as a lot of farms buy their wormer from trade, so it's often the case that we get involved when there's problems. But that's not for me saying vets would have got it right. That's not by any stretch of the imagination. But I think the last 5 years, what we've seen with a 53% reduction in antibiotics is a good sign that we could do a lot better. So there's that. So that's kind of me saying we haven't naturally always been involved. So kind of we need to be, I think, far more. And then in terms of whether or not we're involved, why do people reach for porons? They're cheap, they're easy, and the risk of using them on the face of it is really low. You're going to knock, if you do 2 or 3 treatments, they're very persistent. So over the risk period of the grazing season, you can almost guarantee that you're not going to get problems. But that doesn't address the fact that you are going to get problems. You're going to build resistance, you're probably wasting money, and you're losing all of the beneficials that we've talked about tonight. So that figure, 367 million quid's worth of benefit to UK cattle industry every year, if everyone was using ivermectin porons, that's what people are losing. But you don't see that. It's not easy to see that, and it's not. I don't think it's becoming more widely known, I think. Claire, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, mate. No, I think you covered it pretty well there, to be honest. I think it is just easy to go out and buy wormer. There is supposedly a barrier in terms of SQPs that actually prescribe that for you, but if you go in and you say, well, I've got worms, then quite often you'll get a wormer and it'll be what they have on the shelf. And we had this problem with this particular farm, the one that we found the lungworm on, where the only product that was available from the farm sales was an ivermectin, and we really didn't need to be using that product. So it takes a little bit more thinking about, really. I think it's often just easy to say, well, yeah, I have that, it works, so you go in and you use it. But I think it's that whole trying to just think a bit more holistically in your approach and whether or not it's appropriate to use those. And thinking about things like, I never ever thought about dung beetles until about a year ago. It didn't even cross my mind. I would have suggested using ivermectins probably as a choice of worm, and not really thought about it. But it's all part of a bigger picture now for me, I think.
There's one other thing that's come to my mind as you've been speaking, Claire, and that's it's the fourth benefit, if you like, of this pilot, which is if we're worming cattle the whole grazing season in their 2 first seasons, then they don't develop resistance naturally to lungworm and gutworm. And what we're seeing is lungworm and abomasititis in adult milking cattle, for example, and explaining that has been quite useful to why actually we want to, if you like, increase the risk level a bit by allowing some exposure to some of these worms, so that the benefit is gained later when the animal is giving back and producing for the farm. So that's the last point I think I had on it.
Can I say something? It's Sarah Tomlinson. I'm a vet from Derbyshire. So I've been sat on some of the talks, and I expect other people have, about the sort of the next step to BPS with the animal health pathway, and looking at sort of basic requirements on farm to access grants for things. And one thing we've sort of fundamentally said is decent handling systems. And I think that's a big barrier to using injectables and drenches. We've got farmers who are struggling for time anyway. They're often working by themselves. So, looking at the bigger picture and actually engaging with government and telling them these stories, and how that can then fit into their clean air strategy, their carbon neutral aims, comes back to really basic stuff like being able to handle your cattle safely. And so,
absolutely. I think that's one of the things that I'm really keen about working within Vet Partners, to bring some of that, the group power together to feed in for things exactly like that.
Yeah, definitely. Me too.
And any other vets on the call? The cattle handling, we're going to invest, or building a crush at the minute, to give us that capability using vet techs to say to someone, here's a solution. You don't have to use boron. Very cheaply, we can use a cheaper product, and we'll help you by getting someone else to deliver it, if that's a barrier as well. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys. Some good questions there. And there's been some really good contributions on the chat area as well, which has been great. So people happy to contribute further, but then also lots of contributions, particularly around farmyard manure and slurry. And further up the thread, there was some talk about the basic payment scheme and where that's going, and some ideas as well about some future ideas. So any more questions, keep them coming. We're okay for a bit of time, or any more contributions on soil health or worm populations, anything along those lines, keep them coming.
Dan?
Yes, Dave.
I mentioned earlier on a message you about mentioning chicory and the importance of chicory in herbal in mixtures, and it's sort of just been mentioned about handling systems, and into you all about dung beetles, which are massive importance. The use of sort of chicory as a natural anthelmintic in sort of both conserve forage and grazing lays can sort of integrate root structures, root zones, due to red clovers to create natural amino acids to the modern cow, and sort of, it's quite sort of important going forward, I think, to sort of be open-minded on using those sorts of herbal mixtures in that different form of thinking, because you're creating sort of, you've probably heard me say, healthy slurry, healthy soil, and there's been a lot of talk, just on a lot of sort of comments about slurry. The I've always said sort of feeding healthy cows creates healthy slurry. So you're creating that importance, what I've always called the biocircle. And those roots are playing an important part of that in those different diverse mixtures. Root zones are the important parts of creating probiotics. the use of those probiotic systems are creating a better immune defence system within the cow. And sort of, I feel it's important. Chicory is a massive ally in creating that worm barrier, both in cattle and.
Yeah, no, really valid points, Dave. And you and I working together have talked about that in a lot of detail. And there's been some bits that have come up on the chat. And also Claire made the point about diverse root structures and what that does for soil health. And it would be great to get a whole discussion evening going. And you know, we dream of wandering around farms together and fields together in the sort of when things calm down a little bit, digging holes everywhere and looking at that type of thing. So it'd be brilliant to be able to get a bit more discussion going on that front. Yeah,
it's a really good point. And herbal lays, willow, heather. There's work done on about the condensed tannins and their effect on parasites, as well as the content of mineral to cobalt and zinc. And I know there's at least one of our farms, I think he's in the group, is looking at a trial or is keen to look at a trial to sort of get involved with that agroforestry. And as a practice, we've signed up to try and progress some research with heather as well.
Is it? One thing I would be quite interested in, if people can hear me, is knowing how, I hesitate to say it, but getting rid of slurry from a dairy herd that's housed within, we're milking 300 plus autumn calving cows. The slurry shouldn't be a byproduct, but it feels like a byproduct, a waste product. Using slurry on herbal lays, would be one thing that I'd be very interested in hearing other people's experience of. Chicory would be a wonderful thing in our dairy herd, I'm sure, but I know that we would struggle to manage it. For instance, I don't know if anybody has any views on that.
Yeah, slurry should never be used as a byproduct. Always be used as an asset, and that I always say, the biocircle is feeding healthy feed to healthy cows creates a healthy slurry, and if you can even feed that slurry with an oxygenating bacteria, then you're feeding worm population out in the field rather than using it as a waste disposal exercise, then bringing nitrogen into the system. Ammonium nitrogen to cows is in my book. It doesn't go together. We've got to increase that calcium content to the soil because we're taking it away from the cow. So we by feeding slurry and oxygenating bacteria, and actually offsetting the cost of it and reducing nitrogen is a massive step forward in cow health. Done it for quite some time now, and it's a win-win situation. Feeding root zones, using slurry as an asset,
and that's possible to do with diverse swards.
Absolutely,
yeah. That are grazed. We're a grazing herd, but we're an intensive grazing herd. I'd love probably to be a bit less intensive, to be truthful, but so you're able to somehow utilize slurry and hit the residuals and grazing covers required.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the deoxygenation issue of slurry that creates the toxicity. If you create it as an aerated product, containing oxygen within the slurry, oxygenating bacteria, it's feeding oxygen into the soil and almost creating a natural aeration effect. So you've got a system whereby you've got different root zones that are creating a soiling effect. You're putting air into the soil, you're increasing water infiltration, and using slurry as almost a compost. So you're creating a sort of a compost soup, if you like, and it's no problem to cows to be grazing grass after that, because you've got better utilisation of it.
I think we better have a lesson, please. That sounds great.
Well, I think what we've done there beautifully is demonstrate the benefits of collaborative learning, haven't we? That actually you have one person who stands up and tells everyone things. All you're going to learn is what that person knows. Whereas if you have people who can facilitate some discussion, and there's people spread throughout the group who are doing all sorts of different things in different situations with different experiences, that's where you take loads more away from it. And that's demonstrated time again. So this is really what we want to try and utilize the benefits of it. And that was brilliant. Great question, and then great contribution from Dave in terms of how it's done. So brilliant. Shows how it can work.
Thank you.
Can I pick up on your question in the chat about worm infestation being a symptom of a problem and not a problem in themselves? And you had a PhD student when you were mob grazing, and he found low levels of fecal egg counts. And that's probably, he said, was it associated with grazing tall grass? Now that is probably true. So the taller the grass there is, the less likely they are to pick up worms, because your worm eggs sort of sit right at the bottom of your grass, so down near the roots. So the closer the cows get to the grass, or the closer the sheep gets to the bottom, to the roots, the more likely they are to pick up worm burdens. And also moving the cattle every day as well, so you're not getting reinfections. So if you don't go to that same bit of ground and you keep that clear, and potentially even until the next season, then you're going to be much less likely to pick up worms. So yeah, I would completely agree with both of those points, really. So you graze tall grass, moving the cows every day, and you're not returning back to that same bit of ground for a few weeks. They're all going to reduce your worm burdens in your cattle. So yeah, it is often a symptom of a problem. And again, biodiversity will affect that too. So if you dung beetles are all great for that reason.
Yeah, really, yeah, good points, Claire. As everyone was talking, I just wanted to, I'm sure a lot of you will know about Cotswold Seeds, and I think they have an education centre called Farm Ed, and some really good, useful images and videos online you can go and have a look at. But yeah, demonstrating the different root structures and all of the benefits in herbal lays. And one of the fascinating things that I've found is this Darwin effect. So by making use of the diversity of root systems and also above ground as well, and different grasses or plants growing at different times of the year, you can actually get more biomass produced on the same area of land than even a perennial ryegrass with a lot of fertilizer, which I found fascinating. So anyone looking at, interested, go and have a look online and look at their videos. I think they're great.
Rob, can I just add something on that very subject? Yeah. We took a Cheshire Grassland trip up to North Yorkshire about 5 years ago. I went to see a guy called Angus Gowdy near Northallerton. Okay. And he had a mixed species sward up to his knees and up to his thighs, put the cows on it, they cleared the lot and put the milk up. And absolutely fascinating how well the cows took the stuff. And quite frankly, the soil was just beautiful. And I would say one or two organic guys can teach us a lot. Yeah.
And I got in contact with the guys at Cotswold Seeds to ask them specifically, because a lot of it is about drought resistance and not necessarily dairy in wet lands. And I think there's some questions there that I'd love to, so if any farmers out there, dairy especially with wet ground, have some experiences, I'd love to hear about it. I think there are some, and he was going to get back to me. Anyone want to put their hand up about that? Experiences or? No.
That's an area for discussion then, Rob, isn't it? Given people's experiences or lack of. But Colin makes an interesting point that there's perhaps things we can learn maybe from the organic sector, but it doesn't mean that we can't